election budget as well. I spoke to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Housing, Michael Sukkar, late last week. Michael Sukkar, thanks for joining us. If you were to sum up this budget...
Good to be with you, Andrew.
If you were to sum up this budget, what's it about?
Andrew, this budget's about jobs. It's about locking in the significant gains that we've made in the middle of a pandemic. It's about ensuring that the phenomenal economic growth that we've seen over the last 2 quarters continues. It's about banking those gains and making sure we keep the foot on the economic accelerator to make sure more people can get into jobs and that businesses thrive as they are recovering from obviously the devastating effects of the pandemic.
Is it also about the next election? Because there's no austerity push here, there's no push really for a surplus, it's more stimulus. You couldn't do anything else politically, could you?
Well, Andrew, what we've done throughout this pandemic, and let's remember we're still in the midst of it, we've still got COVID-19 raging in parts of the world, is we are taking a consistent approach as we have throughout, and that's addressing the immediate issues for the economy, getting people back into jobs, supporting businesses. And now that we're seeing a recovery, it's about really locking in those gains and pushing forward.
All right, well, you're right. Australia's record is remarkable. Why aren't you further ahead in the polls?
Andrew, I think if there's anything that the 2019 election should have taught us, indeed elections around the world should have taught us, is not to focus too much on polls. I know it's a big focus for many people inside Parliament House, particularly in the media, but from our perspective, we're focused on delivering for the Australian people. As John Howard always said, good policy is good politics, and having a strong economy, having more people in work, supporting jobs, as we've seen throughout the pandemic, whether it was JobKeeper or Home Builder, supporting businesses get to the other side. In the end, those things are always judged fairly by the Australian people, but in the end, we will focus on delivering for them, and everything else normally looks after itself.
Well, you've quoted John Howard. Let me quote Peter Costello in him saying last year, we need to do something about this debt. Now, you were always on about debt and deficit and Labor's debt and deficit. No approach in this budget towards tackling that debt. When is it going to happen?
Well, Andrew, the Treasurer has been very clear with the Australian people around the markers that we would use to engage on budget repair. I think no Australian would fairly criticise the government for the fiscal support that we put in place during the pandemic, whether it was the $100 billion JobKeeper program, $2.5 billion Home Builder program, Job Seeker, the list goes on and on. I don't think anyone can fairly criticise the government for doing what we did. Now, what are the fruits of that? What's the product of that effort, Andrew? Well, it's an unemployment rate at 5.6%. It's employment levels above where they were pre-pandemic. So that's our focus.
Will the childcare subsidy be increased in the budget? Will there be more money for childcare?
Andrew, I know you've got to ask all these questions. You will see it all on the night. We have made significant investments into childcare. We've been a government that has invested heavily and reformed childcare in really significant ways. But you'll see all that in the budget. The budget all hangs together.
How important is it to show women you're on their side in this budget?
Well, Andrew, I think it's always incumbent on the government to appeal to every Australian, and certainly women, being 51% of the population, is a group that we have put an extraordinary effort into. If you look at the gender wage gap, where that has gone under our government as far as narrowing, whether you look at the recovered jobs since the pandemic, disproportionately recovered for women. So women's economic security is going to be a significant focus. Their broader security is going to be a significant focus. I think we need to speak to all Australians, but particularly women, but all Australians, about why in the end we're backing them and that we're going to support them in having a go, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to improve their prosperity.
How much of a focus will there be on infrastructure? We know that we've had these supports such as JobKeeper just to keep the economy up while you've had lockdowns and the rest. Is now the time, or isn't it now the time, to invest in an asset going forward?
Andrew, we in the October budget increased and brought forward significant infrastructure investment, over $100 billion over 10 years. So we've really put our shoulder to the wheel on infrastructure, but of course infrastructure investment is a key focus of every Morrison budget. We'll have more to say on infrastructure, but I can tell you we have put our best foot forward in bringing forward a lot of expenditure infrastructure just as recently as the October budget.
Just briefly on that, will there be any measures to deal with housing affordability in the budget?
Well, what you've seen for a number of years from us, Andrew, is a focus on housing. When the Prime Minister was Treasurer and I was his Assistant Minister, we handed down a really significant budget that involved housing and housing affordability issues. And ever since then, it's been a focus of the budget, and this will be no different. It will, of course, include housing-related measures. We've had great success in housing, whether it's the first home loan deposit scheme, allowing people to purchase their first home with a 5% deposit, the home builder program, $25,000 grants that have now got an industry busier than it was pre-pandemic. So we'll continue to support first home buyers and the residential construction industry absolutely in the budget.
All right, the iron ore price, that's been very important for you in what I expect to be deficits which are much less than what you forecast even in December. Would you agree with that you've been quite lucky there?
I wouldn't call it luck, Andrew. I think it's an outstanding industry, and from our perspective, we've been very prudent in the way we've budgeted the iron ore price, and so it's exceeded that price, and there's a bottom line dividend for the budget, which is a good thing.
What did you make of Michael Pezzulo's comments about the drumbeats of war, and are we likely to see a khaki election?
Well, look, Andrew, I'm not going to add to those comments. In the end, we're a government who fiercely defends our sovereignty. But we're also a government that works really hard and strives really hard to maintain fantastic relationships with our neighbours and with our trading partners. And, you know, it's hard sometimes to walk that fine line, but I think the government has done a very good job at that. We'll always defend our sovereignty, but as Australians would expect of us, we always strive as hard as we can to have great relationships with all of our neighbours. And I think to a large extent we've been successful. There's clearly challenges, and there'll be more challenges on the horizon, but we will continue to make decisions in our national interest and do it in a way that's respectful of our neighbours and that seeks to always achieve good outcomes for all parties.
Mr. Sugar, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.